Cari Farver and Lisa Mitchell, two women whose lives would collide in a deadly obsession, set the stage for a chilling tale of deception, digital manipulation, and murder that would shock everyone who thought they knew the truth. Cari Farver was known as a focused and organized freelance app designer who preferred a quiet routine. She lived alone in a modest apartment on the edge of town, where the streets were usually calm and the nights felt peaceful. Her life revolved around her work, early morning jogs, and a small group of friends who admired her discipline. Cari rarely forgot appointments and never ignored her responsibilities, which made what happened next deeply unsettling. On a cold November morning, Cari was scheduled to present a new project to a major client. It was one of the most important meetings of her career, and she had prepared for weeks. When she did not arrive, the client assumed she was delayed by traffic. An hour passed with no call. Her co-workers began searching their emails to see if she had sent any updates. But there was nothing. They attempted to call her, expecting she would answer immediately, but her phone went straight to voicemail each time. It was unusual for her to disappear without explanation. By the afternoon, small concerns turned into quiet anxiety. Her closest friend, Jenna, decided to drive to Cari's apartment to check on her. The hallway was silent and there was no sign of movement inside the apartment. When Jenna knocked, there was no response. She tried calling again while standing outside the door, but the ringing never came from inside. It was as if Cari and her phone had vanished together. Jenna reported her worries to the building manager, who confirmed seeing Cari 2 days earlier, but nothing since. He remembered her carrying grocery bags and looking tired, but that was normal for a busy professional. He had not noticed anything suspicious. Jenna considered calling the police, but hesitated, thinking it might be too soon. Instead, she sent messages to Cari's family, hoping someone had heard from her. Meanwhile, Cari's mother felt a strange heaviness when she read the message. She knew her daughter's habits well. Cari always checked in, even if briefly. She never disappeared for a full day without informing anyone. Her mother tried calling her repeatedly, but there was no reply. She drove to Cari's apartment the next morning, only to find it still locked and dark. The mail from the previous day remained untouched. Inside the police department, a report was finally filed for a missing adult. Because Cari was independent and had no history of mental health issues or sudden impulsive actions, the officers took the report seriously. They started by contacting her workplace, her gym, and her phone service provider. The phone had not been used since the night before she missed her meeting. There were no outgoing calls, no texts, and no location update. As the day turned into night, a sense of unease spread among the people who knew her. No one could explain her absence. There were no signs of struggle, no unusual transactions, no witnesses claiming to have seen her leave town. It felt as if she had stepped out of her life and vanished into thin air. What no one realized yet was that this disappearance marked the beginning of a dark, complicated case, where every clue would lead deeper into deception and danger. A few days after Cari Farver disappeared, the first strange messages began to appear. Friends and coworkers who had been worried suddenly received texts from Cari's number. At first, the messages seemed normal, but a closer look revealed that something was deeply wrong. The tone was cold and distant, almost mechanical. They claimed she was moving away without notice, quitting her work permanently, and cutting ties with everyone who had been part of her life. Those who knew Cari well immediately felt that the messages were not from her. The language was unfamiliar, lacking the warmth and humor she usually included even in short texts. Small details were off. She referenced people she barely knew, used expressions she never used, and included strange instructions about her accounts and belongings. Some friends initially considered that she might have suffered a sudden breakdown or decided to isolate herself completely. They thought perhaps the stress of her projects or personal life had pushed her into taking drastic steps. But even for that explanation, the messages were too controlled, too precise, and at the same time unnervingly threatening. Certain texts hinted at secrets she had never shared, suggesting knowledge of private conversations and personal habits that made recipients feel as if someone else was observing her life closely. The messages created a sense of unease, making her friends feel both concerned and fearful. The oddity did not stop with the words themselves. Photos started appearing in the messages. Pictures of Cari's apartment, her car, her work desk, all in angles that suggested deliberate surveillance. Some images showed small personal items out of place, torn notebooks or objects placed in strange positions. The eerie presentation hinted that whoever was sending these messages had been inside her apartment, or at least had access to it. Every photo seemed designed to unsettle, to create fear, and to suggest that Cari's life was being manipulated even after her disappearance. Coworkers noticed that the messages often came late at night, sometimes at odd intervals that did not match normal human activity. Some days brought long streams of texts, while others passed with only a single line. The style remained unnervingly consistent, short, precise sentences, sometimes laced with dark undertones or veiled warnings. Attempts to reply to the messages were met with cryptic responses or silence, heightening the mystery. People who had been trying to cope with her sudden absence found themselves drawn into a digital trap they could not understand. Authorities began to monitor the messages closely. The text patterns were unusual and suggested a high level of planning. Whoever was behind this had knowledge of Cari's habits, contacts, and routines, using that information to create an illusion that she was still alive and making choices she had never made. The messages were no longer just strange. They were evidence of a calculated manipulation, a psychological game that preyed on the worry and fear of her loved ones. Each notification added another layer of tension, leaving those who cared for her questioning what was real and what had been invented. By the end of the week, the messages had spread beyond her immediate circle. Friends shared screenshots with family members, and a few even reached local acquaintances who were not part of her daily life. The sense of dread grew with each new message. Everyone began to realize that this was no ordinary disappearance. Something sinister was at play. Someone had taken control of Cari's identity, using it to mislead, intimidate, and terrify. What had started as concern for a missing person had turned into a chilling mystery, a puzzle that hinted at danger lurking closer than anyone could imagine. As the days passed, the strange messages from Cari's number became increasingly disturbing. They were no longer just distant or confusing. They began to carry a darker undertone, filled with threats and warnings that unsettled everyone who received them. Friends noticed that the texts contained hints of danger, suggesting that anyone who tried to intervene could face consequences. Some messages included vague statements about keeping secrets or watching closely, creating a sense that someone was observing not only Cari's life, but also the people around her. The psychological effect was immediate. Those who had previously been worried about her disappearance now felt a creeping fear that extended beyond curiosity or concern. Alongside the text messages, images appeared online depicting Cari's belongings in disarray. Clothes were scattered, notebooks torn apart, and personal items burned or damaged. The photos were anonymous, shared on obscure social media accounts, but the links were sent directly to her friends and coworkers. Investigators later concluded that the images had been deliberately staged to create the impression that Cari's apartment had been ransacked. Each photo seemed to tell a story, a visual narrative that implied danger and chaos, yet no physical break-in had been reported by neighbors or the building management. It was as if someone was constructing a scene designed to terrify and mislead. The police attempted to trace the messages, but the digital trail led nowhere. The signals bounced between multiple cell towers, sometimes appearing to originate from different parts of the city. Burned or discarded phones were used, making it nearly impossible to identify a single source. Experts who studied the patterns noted that the sender had knowledge of Cari's life and relationships, using that knowledge to manipulate recipients' emotions. It became clear that whoever was behind the messages was not only technologically savvy, but also psychologically strategic, crafting communications designed to create fear, confusion, and false assumptions. Meanwhile, Cari's friends began noticing inconsistencies in the information being shared through the messages. Some claimed she had traveled to distant locations, while others suggested she was in hiding within the city. None of these locations could be verified. Each new message seemed to contradict the previous one, leaving loved ones trapped in a cycle of uncertainty. The emotional toll was severe. Anxiety and suspicion grew, and some began questioning the intentions of people around them. The messages created a climate of paranoia, eroding trust and complicating the search for Cari. Investigators began to suspect that Cari herself had not sent the messages. Linguistic analysis revealed subtle but distinct differences in sentence structure, word choice, and tone. The writing was methodical, lacking the emotional nuances that characterized Cari's normal communication. Experts concluded that someone had assumed her digital identity, using it as a tool to cover up the truth about her disappearance. This revelation shifted the investigation dramatically, from a search for a missing person to a probe into potential foul play. The unsettling combination of threatening texts, manipulated images, and untraceable digital activity created an atmosphere of fear that reached beyond Cari's immediate circle. Friends and family felt powerless, constantly questioning whether each new piece of information was real or fabricated. It became increasingly clear that Cari's disappearance was not a simple case of someone leaving voluntarily. The messages were the work of a calculated mind, intent on controlling the narrative, hiding the truth, and keeping the world guessing about her fate. The investigation had entered a new, darker phase, one that would slowly uncover layers of obsession, deception, and danger that no one had anticipated. As investigators delved deeper into Cari Farver's life, a new lead began to emerge, one that shifted the focus from digital deception to personal relationships. Cari had recently started dating a quiet, introverted technician named Mark. On the surface, their relationship seemed unremarkable. They met through mutual friends, shared similar interests in technology and design, and maintained a low-profile social life. To most observers, it appeared healthy, even supportive. However, detectives discovered that Mark had a former partner named Lisa, someone who had never fully let go of their past. While Mark had moved on, Lisa's behavior suggested a lingering obsession. Lisa's history was filled with patterns of obsessive tendencies, controlling behavior, and emotional volatility. Former friends and acquaintances described her as someone who struggled with rejection, sometimes resorting to harassment or intimidation when confronted with situations she could not control. Investigators began to see a possible link between Lisa's obsession with Mark and Cari's sudden disappearance. Surveillance footage and witness statements placed Lisa in areas near Cari's apartment on multiple occasions, sometimes coinciding with times when Cari was last seen. The presence of her car, parked at unusual hours, suggested a deliberate attempt to monitor or follow Cari without attracting attention. As police examined digital records and phone data, they noticed that messages sent from Cari's number often coincided with times when Lisa's devices were active nearby. While this was circumstantial, it strengthened the theory that someone close to Mark, and by extension aware of Cari's personal life, could have orchestrated the messages. The investigators realized that the individual behind these communications had knowledge of Cari's routines, habits, and relationships, information that could only come from someone observing her closely or someone intimately familiar with her social circle. Further inquiry into Lisa's past revealed more unsettling details. She had a history of manipulating situations to her advantage, particularly in matters of personal relationships. Friends described instances where she had fabricated stories, sent anonymous threats, or attempted to isolate individuals from those around them. In some cases, she had used social media or digital communication to create confusion and fear, demonstrating a calculated and strategic mindset. These findings aligned closely with the methods used in the messages from Cari's phone. Detectives also examined Cari's personal life more closely, uncovering small disputes and tensions that had previously seemed insignificant. There were hints of jealousy, subtle conflicts, and disagreements about boundaries, all pointing toward someone with the potential motive and opportunity to interfere in her life. Mark's testimony confirmed that Lisa had shown persistent interest in his life after their separation. sometimes following him or attempting to contact him indirectly. While this behavior alone would not confirm involvement in a crime, it suggested a willingness to cross lines, a dangerous disregard for boundaries that could escalate under pressure. The investigation began to map a timeline of movements, messages and surveillance, revealing overlaps between Lisa's known locations and critical moments in Cari's disappearance. Patterns emerged suggesting that the harassment, digital deception and manipulation were not random but carefully planned. Each piece of evidence pointed toward a personal motive, a deeply rooted obsession that had escalated into something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. By this point, law enforcement had begun to see the contours of a calculated plan, one in which Lisa's fixation on Mark intersected tragically with Cari's life. The seemingly ordinary connections of relationships, jealousy and lingering obsession had transformed into a dangerous web, laying the groundwork for the shocking revelations that would follow. What had begun as a missing person case was now clearly linked to someone from Cari's personal world, someone who had both motive and opportunity to orchestrate the unfolding nightmare. The investigation was entering a critical phase, where digital traces, personal histories, and careful surveillance would finally begin to converge. After weeks of following leads and analyzing digital trails, the investigation took a dramatic turn when a neighbor came forward with a tip about Cari Farver's apartment. The tip seemed innocuous at first, a complaint about strange odors coming from the unit. At the time, it had not drawn serious attention, but detectives decided it was worth investigating. When they arrived, they noticed a faint chemical smell lingering in the hallway near Cari's door. It was subtle but unusual, the kind of odor that suggested something had been hidden, sealed, or tampered with. The investigators knew that in cases like this, even the smallest clue could reveal a hidden truth. Once inside the apartment, officers began a meticulous search. On the surface, everything appeared normal, but closer inspection revealed irregularities. The apartment had been cleaned in some areas while others seemed untouched, a pattern suggesting someone had been selective in what they wanted to leave behind. Behind a recently repaired section of the wall, forensic specialists discovered traces of blood. The stains were faint, but analysis confirmed they belonged to Cari. The discovery immediately transformed the case from a mysterious disappearance to a likely homicide. The investigation uncovered more hidden evidence. Inside the apartment's air vent, investigators found a crushed SIM card and a partially burned phone battery. Both items had been deliberately destroyed, likely in an attempt to erase the digital trail of the person sending messages from Cari's phone. Experts noted that the effort to conceal evidence indicated planning and knowledge of forensic methods. Whoever had done this understood the risks of leaving behind digital or physical traces and had taken careful measures to avoid detection. Officers also examined the apartment for fingerprints, fibers, and any other physical evidence that could point to the perpetrator. They found small clues, stray hairs, shoe prints, and smudges of dirt that did not belong to Cari. Each piece added weight to the theory that someone had entered the apartment without permission and remained there long enough to manipulate the environment. These findings suggested a level of boldness and calculation that went beyond a crime of opportunity. Neighbors provided additional information. Some recalled seeing unfamiliar vehicles parked near the building at odd hours, and one mentioned a woman repeatedly coming and going with small packages. While none of the neighbors had directly witnessed a crime, their observations helped reconstruct the timeline of events leading up to Cari's disappearance. Investigators realized that the apartment, once considered a safe and private space, had been infiltrated, manipulated, and turned into a controlled scene for psychological and physical intimidation. The combination of digital manipulation and physical evidence painted a chilling picture. It was no longer just a case of someone vanishing mysteriously. This was a crime executed with precision, intent, and a clear understanding of how to mislead investigators and loved ones alike. Each layer of concealment, from burned devices to hidden traces of blood, revealed a perpetrator who had studied the victim's life and surroundings carefully. By the end of the search, it became evident that Cari's disappearance was part of a much larger, carefully orchestrated plan. The apartment, once the setting of ordinary daily life, had become a stage for deception and danger. The evidence uncovered within those walls would prove crucial in connecting the digital messages, surveillance information, and behavioral patterns of potential suspects. For investigators, this discovery marked the first undeniable proof that Cari's life had been violently interrupted and that her disappearance was no accident. The case had crossed a point of no return, entering a realm where truth, manipulation, and danger converged, setting the stage for the shocking revelations yet to come. By the time detectives had gathered enough physical evidence from Cari Farver's apartment, it became clear that solving the case required focusing on the digital side of the crime. The messages that had been sent from Cari's phone were no longer simply confusing. They were central to understanding what had happened. Investigators decided to set a digital trap to identify the sender. Using advanced monitoring tools, they tracked incoming and outgoing texts, email accounts, and social media interactions linked to Cari's identity. The goal was to catch whoever was behind the manipulation in real time. The first discovery came quickly. The messages, which had been sent sporadically, now showed distinct patterns. They were being sent from cheap burner phones, purchased with cash, avoiding any traceable financial record. The phones themselves were activated briefly, sent multiple messages, and were then discarded or replaced with identical devices. This constant rotation made it extremely difficult to pinpoint a physical location using traditional methods. However, the investigators noticed similarities in the timing, phrasing, and digital behavior that suggested a single person was controlling all of them. To gain more information, law enforcement set up surveillance near stores known to sell prepaid phones without identification requirements. Cameras were positioned to capture anyone purchasing multiple devices in a short time frame. Within days, footage revealed a woman repeatedly buying phones, often paying with cash and taking measures to avoid being recorded clearly. The detectives studied the footage closely and recognized her. It was Lisa, the former partner of Mark, Cari's boyfriend. The discovery confirmed the theory that someone close to Mark and familiar with Cari's life was orchestrating the messages. Linguistic and behavioral analysis of the messages revealed more details about Lisa's methods. The texts were carefully timed, designed to appear as if Cari was active at different times of day, and even in different locations. The language was precise, intentionally mimicking certain patterns of Cari's speech while omitting her natural warmth and humor. Experts suggested that this style required not only obsessive attention to detail, but also a deep understanding of digital communication. Whoever was behind it was methodical and deliberate, capable of manipulating both technology and human perception. At the same time, investigators began linking Lisa to other suspicious activity around Cari's apartment and workplace. Security footage showed her car in areas close to Cari's daily routines, often at times that coincided with when new messages appeared. There were small but telling signs: a door left slightly ajar, packages moved, and items photographed in ways that implied access to her home. These combined physical traces with the digital evidence to paint a picture of a carefully executed surveillance operation. The revelation of Lisa's direct involvement marked a turning point in the investigation. Until this moment, authorities had relied on circumstantial clues, anonymous tips, and fragmented digital traces. Now, with both surveillance footage and behavioral analysis confirming her role, they could connect the digital deception to a real, present suspect. It became evident that the obsessive manipulation, the threatening messages, and the deliberate destruction of devices were all part of a calculated plan to control the narrative of Cari's disappearance. The case had evolved into something far more disturbing than a simple missing person investigation. Lisa's actions demonstrated not only a personal obsession, but also a sophisticated understanding of technology, privacy, and human psychology. The digital trap had exposed her methods, motives, and patterns, providing law enforcement with the evidence needed to build a strong case. It was clear that the messages, once thought to be confusing or erratic, were part of a deliberate and sinister effort to conceal the truth about Cari's fate and manipulate everyone around her. The investigation was entering its most critical phase, where the convergence of digital evidence and real-world behavior would soon reveal the full extent of the crime. The breakthrough in the investigation came when law enforcement obtained a search warrant for Lisa's storage garage. The warrant was the result of careful monitoring of her movements, digital activity, and the evidence collected from Cari Farver's apartment. The detectives approached the garage with caution, aware that anything inside could contain crucial evidence or even present a danger. Upon entering, they were immediately struck by the meticulous organization of the space. Shelves lined the walls, each filled with neatly stacked boxes, binders and containers. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, but closer inspection revealed that much of it contained detailed records of a dangerous obsession. Investigators found burned notebooks carefully hidden behind other boxes. The notebooks, though charred and damaged, contained partially legible plans, notes, and timelines. Each page appeared to document movements, messages, and surveillance of Cari. Lisa had meticulously recorded every detail, including dates, times, and observations, along with instructions for manipulating Cari's online accounts. Passwords, access codes, and instructions for maintaining the illusion that Cari was still active and alive were all catalogued. The sheer volume of information suggested that this was not an impulsive act. It was a carefully executed plan that had been in motion for weeks, perhaps months. In a locked metal box, officers found a small memory card that would ultimately provide the most damning evidence. The card contained deleted photos that, once recovered, revealed a chilling sequence of events. Among the images were shots of a dimly lit basement, a restrained figure, and timestamps that corresponded to the night Cari disappeared. The photos provided visual proof of the crime, showing that the perpetrator had taken extraordinary measures to stage and document the victim. These images left investigators with no doubt that Cari had been held against her will and that the digital messages were part of a broader scheme to mislead friends, family, and authorities. The garage itself was a testament to Lisa's obsession. Evidence of her planning extended beyond digital devices and written notes. There were maps of the neighborhood with routes marked, receipts from purchases of phones and other materials, and even security camera footage she had downloaded from public areas near Cari's apartment. It became clear that Lisa had spent considerable effort monitoring Cari, anticipating movements, and creating an illusion of control over her life. Every detail reflected her knowledge of Cari's habits and daily routines, which had allowed her to manipulate both the digital narrative and the physical environment. Law enforcement began piecing together the timeline. The surveillance, combined with the notes and digital evidence, revealed a calculated sequence. First, the disappearance, followed by messages designed to confuse and intimidate, and finally the destruction of devices to erase traces. Each step had been premeditated to maintain the illusion that Cari was still present in her life and online accounts. The level of control and planning demonstrated a deep psychological manipulation that extended far beyond ordinary criminal behavior. With these findings, the case against Lisa became undeniable. The combination of digital records, physical evidence, and visual proof from the memory card painted a complete picture of her actions. Every layer of deception, from messages to manipulated social media accounts, was now clearly linked to her obsessive behavior. Investigators realized that what they were dealing with was not just a crime of opportunity or passion, it was a carefully orchestrated act, executed with chilling precision, leaving behind a digital and physical trail that ultimately exposed the truth about Cari Farver's fate. The arrest of Lisa marked the beginning of the final chapter in the investigation of Cari Farver's disappearance. But it also opened a new, complex phase, piecing together the full extent of the crime and understanding the mind behind it. Once in custody, Lisa remained silent, offering no explanation for her actions. Investigators focused on connecting the digital evidence, surveillance data, and physical clues gathered from her storage garage and Cari's apartment. Every device, note, and photograph was examined in painstaking detail, revealing a story that was both calculated and terrifying. The scope of her planning suggested an obsession that had escalated far beyond a simple grudge or jealousy. Authorities were faced with the difficult task of presenting the evidence in a way that would hold up in court, despite the absence of Cari's body. Digital forensics teams reconstructed the destroyed and deleted messages, piecing together the communication that had kept friends and family in fear and confusion. These texts revealed the precise timing, language and strategy Lisa had employed to manipulate everyone into believing that Cari was still alive. The pattern was clear. Each message served to maintain control over the narrative, isolate her victim, and delay any investigation into her disappearance. In addition to the messages, the photographs recovered from the memory card were critical. The images provided visual confirmation of the crime and of Cari's confinement, demonstrating that Lisa had not only stalked and harassed her but had also committed premeditated acts of violence. The photos, along with timestamps, allowed investigators to establish a timeline of the night Cari disappeared. They documented the sequence of events from surveillance, restraint and intimidation, to the eventual destruction of evidence intended to erase all traces of the crime. Lisa was formally charged with first-degree murder, identity theft, cyber harassment, and obstruction of justice. Mark, Cari's boyfriend, cooperated fully, providing testimony about Lisa's obsessive behavior and prior attempts to manipulate him. His accounts, combined with the evidence, helped construct a comprehensive picture of her motives and methods. The prosecution argued that this was a case where personal obsession intersected with technological expertise, resulting in a crime that used both physical and digital manipulation to conceal the truth. The trial drew attention, not only for the brutality of the act, but also for the sophisticated way in which technology had been used to deceive and control. Expert witnesses explained how the burner phones, fake messages, and staged social media posts created the illusion of Cari's continued presence. The jury learned that each calculated action had contributed to the delay in discovering the truth, keeping friends, family, and law enforcement in a state of uncertainty and fear. Although Cari's body was never recovered, the combination of digital, physical, and testimonial evidence made the case overwhelmingly strong. The court concluded that Lisa had killed Cari shortly after her disappearance and had orchestrated the subsequent digital deception to cover her tracks. The verdict brought relief to those who had been haunted by the months of uncertainty, yet it also left a lingering sense of horror at the meticulousness and cold calculation behind the crime. The case of Cari Farver became a chilling example of how personal obsession, when combined with technological savvy, can turn deadly. It highlighted the dangers of digital manipulation and identity theft, showing how easily a life can be erased or controlled in the modern world. While justice was served in the courtroom, the psychological impact of the case lingered with friends, family, and the community, serving as a stark reminder that danger can hide behind messages, behind screens, and behind the facades of those we think we know.